Hey, welcome to this week's podcast. Just a quick note, during the course of this interview, you're going to hear some slopping around in the background. Apologize for that, and definitely no disrespect to Arjen, but it's hard to get these guys to come in and get work done around the house, so sorry about that. I hope you enjoy this, and I'll talk to you at the backside. This week, I have the great pleasure of talking to somebody who I've spent a little time with in the past, but who has done some amazing work. His name's Arjen van der Schoot. He's the man behind the company Audio Ease, whose main products are Altiverb and Speakerphone. And both of these are really incredible pieces of software, but for me, Altiverb was the first piece of software that really made me think that, hey, this computer audio thing might actually have some legs, because it sounded, well, the first time I heard it, it sounded beautiful, and I was blown away. So with that, I want to say hi to Arjen. Arjen, how are you?
Hi, Darwin. Nice to talk to you. Yeah, I'm doing great. Most of my day is now behind me, so I'm just sitting down with you to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, well, it's thanks for taking the time to do this. I know you're a busy guy, but I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to talk with you a little bit. Why don't we kick off by talking a little bit about your products? So Altiverb has been around since, I think, 2002. Is that correct?
Something like that. 2001, I think, actually. It was, we were just, when we spoke a little bit earlier, you had a recollection of a meeting that we had. That must have been in 2001. I think that was the AES show where we introduced it, and that was the AES show that was postponed because of 9/11.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
And then Speakerphone, when did that come out? That was like
2008, I think.
2008. Okay. Now both of these are really dependent on like modeling the real world in software. And I think that's what, the first time I really heard it in action and working in real time, I was kind of blown away, because it seemed impossible to imagine that kind of thing happening. I'm curious, what is the background that got you to the point of being able to develop software that did this?
Well, of course, by now, the actual process that is called convolution is pretty well known, and we're by far no more the only ones that do it. But for a couple of years, yes, we seem to be at least the only ones doing convolution on the desktop for a while in real time.
Right.
But products like C-Sound and SoundHack already had algorithms in place. You could do this with computer music software, basically. So we knew it from there a little bit, the convolution process. And also we did convolutions that were shorter, which you use for filtering, basic filtering.
Right.
And we knew that there was the promise of being able to apply acoustics to any sound with convolution. We just couldn't really imagine how realistic it would sound, because we hadn't actually heard it ever. And then a box came along called the Sony DRE S777.
Right.
It had a walnut front, I think, and a big shiny knob. And it looked really like a sedan dashboard or something.
Right.
And you could slide a CD-ROM in there with sounds on it, and it just sounded incredibly lifelike. I wouldn't actually be able to say good to me, sound good, because sometimes good is described. It's very hard to label something as good. It's always very fitting for a certain purpose.
Right.
But this seemed to fit the purpose of sounding absolutely lifelike, stunningly lifelike. I thought the Sony DRE did. And then we screwed the box open to look inside, and from top to bottom it was filled with dedicated DSP hardware. And so we kind of lost interest right off the bat, trying to do this, trying to pull this off on a desktop computer. So this must have been 2000 somewhere. Actually, 1999.
Okay.
Because we spent quite a while before we actually got to introduce it at the NAMM show.
So where were you at this time? Were you in university or were you?
Well, we are still a bunch of music technology graduates from Utrecht School of Arts.
Ah, okay, all right.
So yeah, we did study together. And actually, when we did study together, we found when we were nearing the end of our study, we were like 4 or 5 people that were doing some software stuff. And we kind of were the only ones in that subject. And we thought we either split up after this, and then we will probably either have to go to Hamburg or San Francisco, where stuff was going, where actual music software was being developed.
Right.
Or we stay home and we try it. This was way earlier. This was 94, 93, okay. Something like that.
Okay.
And so yeah, we as music technology students in Utrecht, we just did some sort of a trial project together, and started selling that. And that was just when people started to get internet connections in the Netherlands.
Sure.
So we were able to sell that to the other side of the world via the internet, which now, of course, is obvious, but back then
it was not obvious, right?
It seemed totally incredible, even to receive information via the internet.
Right.
Because a couple of years earlier, like 89, I had written a letter to Apple Computer to, from them, obtain the file format description for an AIFF file, a sound file. And 6 weeks later, I got like 3 A4s in a binder, and it described the whole thing, and I didn't have to reverse engineer it,
right.
Which was wonderful.
Right.
It actually showed me how the sample rate was stored, which was a weird number.
Right.
And it was like some sort of a cryptic code. But that was my background in music software, basically. That's the way I obtained my information. I went to a library, read the Computer Music Journal, wrote letters to Apple.
Yeah,
and then by the time we finished our first project, we got to actually sell it. It was Barba Bechtra, by the way. It's still we still sell that, and it was picked up by Electronic Arts right away for their game production, I presume.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
You have some responsibility in changing the way that I heard music. Prior to using one of your bits of software, I did things that was kind of like sometimes poppy, sometimes techno-y, but pretty straightforward sound design-wise. And then I ran across this little program, Thonk 0_2. And I was like, oh, okay, it takes an audio file and does something. So I fed it an audio file, and watching it move, it was clear that I needed to come back 2 days later.
Yep.
So I came back 2 days later, and I had this hour-long file that just twisted my head up.
You must have had a pretty good computer for it to render an hour in 2 days.
Right. Well,
back then it took me a week to do that.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. I just remember it being this long-form piece and just being floored by the detail. I'd never really encountered granular stretching stuff like that before, and it twists my head, and I never thought of sound design in the same way again.
So do you think it helped that you had to wait for 2 days? Did it make you pay more attention to that hour?
Oh, certainly so. And
I think so too.
Because if nothing else, I would find a way to use the right parts. And so in a way, having an hour's worth of material was great because I could comb through it and find little bits and pieces that were exceptional, right? And because of the way it worked, there would be these little micro phrases and stuff that would kind of weave its way through the sound. And finding those, it was like treasure hunting. It was so fun.
It is, and it has a direct connection to Altiverb. Also to the story I told just a minute earlier about getting the AIFF, because the thing you opened was an AIFF file, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Because this was the project that I could do after I got the spec from Apple.
Oh, very interesting.
But the complexity in Thonk was given to me by the complexity of your input audio. And I didn't have to. Actually, my algorithms that ran over that file and chopped it to pieces and put it together in big streams, those would sound pretty straightforward when you feed it like a synthesizer tone, a steady synthesizer tone.
Right.
But the fact that it ran back and forth in the sound that you fed it gave me all the complexity of your sound. So I think what I did was exploit the complexity of your input.
I see.
And then take the credit for it.
Right. Well,
and the connection with Altiverb is that right now I'm doing exactly the same thing. I really don't have to understand the acoustics of these halls, while all my competitors are trying to build, synthesize reverb from the ground up and probably know a lot about it too.
Right.
I can just afford to play completely dumb and just take the thing and put it in a box and thrive on the complexity of the real world.
Well, I think that's actually an interesting kind of direction, because, I mean, certainly one of the things that I ended up finding works really great with Thonk was using vocal samples, right? Because there, by default, there's a lot of complexity. You can never actually hold a tone or anything. So the constant changes seem to be rewarded in the end result. Yeah. Now, similarly, as you speak of it, the way convolution works is kind of similar. You're sort of like taking advantage, but and I'm trying to remember what year it was that I saw in it. For a while there, you started getting competition for other companies that were doing IR-based stuff, but you were also then the first to sort of be able to do real-time tweaks to the convolution as well. I remember I saw one, again, it was probably at a NAMM show some number of years ago, where all of a sudden I came by and you guys were there, and I saw you be able to adjust the decay time in real time. And it was like, oh man, that's the next cool thing, right? And so at some point you have to sort of like, you had to make some decisions about how you were going to imply your own control over the system, right? Right.
I think we in Altiverb we are trying to limit that to like a minimum, because it is also rather easy to basically screw up the original sound too much, to divert too far from the original sound.
Sure.
I think somewhere down the line we may do something where we allow you to go a lot further. But Altiverb, I think basically the beauty of Altiverb is you pick a room, and if you like it shorter, then there is this big knob. But myself, I like to go to another room.
Right.
But of course, I know pretty much all the rooms because I've been there to record them, and therefore I have kind of an idea which one would fit a certain purpose.
Right. So now that opens the door to the next thing, which is recording in these rooms. First of all, can you explain a little bit of what that process is? First of all, how much manipulation does it take just to be allowed to go and record a room? You know, if you're going into a cathedral, what does it take to, like, do you have to talk to the Pope?
Well, so, you know, as long as it's a Catholic place, it's rather easy to get in.
Really?
Everybody that marries or gets buried, yeah, it's quite easy to contact the church and then ask to do something remotely cultural, archaeological, photographical. Yeah,
I didn't even think about sort of like the historical nature of this, but of course.
Yeah, and these churches are basically public places, and lots of people have purposes for these churches that are well, not completely based have anything to do with religion. Yeah, they are normally open to just give them a little money, and they're for rent. These places are in the centers of the most beautiful cities of the world, but they're always for rent for a decent amount of money.
Oh, that's interesting. So, what is the process? What kind of equipment does it take to do a great job of this? And especially in your case, where you have a lot of tweakability after the fact with the sound, are you doing a lot of multi-microphone recording? And how do you coordinate that part of it?
Well, we've been through a number of like incarnations of our setup, but the thing that we have kept consistent is the speaker that we use to play back what we call our stimulus or our impulse,
Okay.
which in our case is a sweep tone, a sine wave sweep that goes up from somewhere between 5 and 10 hertz, all the way up to 24 kilohertz, basically. That's what we play it back via speaker, and that speaker has remained quite steady over the years. And then on the other end, we record it with microphones, and those microphones are a key component too. All the other components hardly seem to matter in the whole process, and that's because the thing we're doing, maybe I should explain that, if you allow me, a little bit of the algorithm that is convolution.
Please do, yes.
Yeah. When you would zoom in on your own recording, your dry recording of a singer, for instance, because this is a reverb thing, so we add acoustics, right? So you will put in a dry sound. If you would zoom in on that, you would see that what is seemingly a kind of a continuous waveform is actually some sort of a stepped line with horizontal steps. When you zoom in far enough, you see the individual samples. You see that they are really steps.
Right.
And these underlying these steps are spikes. It basically is a spike train, a train of spikes, what you're looking at. On a CD, 44,100 pass each second, and then all these spikes have a different level, and along the top you see this waveform. So basically, every dry sound consists of 44,000 spikes. And all these spikes sound identical, only one is louder than the other. And sometimes their sign is flipped, so sometimes one is pointing down and the other one is pointing up in this waveform, right?
Right.
Now, if you have dissected your dry audio into 44,000 identical sounds that only differ in volume, then basically you need the response of any system to only one of those spikes, to apply that to every one of those spikes, of course, in balance, so at the proper volume. So if the spike is low, you put it in low, and then you get a waveform that sounds exactly like it's being played back through that system. And in my case, that system is the acoustics of a hall. So basically, I'm replacing each of those spikes by a spike with a complete tail that could last for 11 seconds in the case of a church. So you can see that if I have to replace each spike by 11 seconds of spikes, which is 11 times 44,000, then that's a lot of work, because I'm going to have to mix in the next spike as well.
Right.
This is a description in the time domain. We do it in the frequency domain, which where it is a complex multiplication of Fourier spectra, and but mathematically it's the same result. It's just less calculations. Now, to get back to the recording of it, So what we need from that church is the response of the church to a spike. So ideally, we would be playing back a spike there, which sounds like something like what your nails would do if you just made the sound. You heard a spike via Skype, which is a nice sentence to begin with. Anyway, a spike, playing back a spike, we've tried that first, and lots of people still do. Acousticians pop balloons, they fire starter pistols.
Pistols, right. Yeah. That's the one I'm familiar with, right?
Yeah, to make something that resembles a spike. But most of these bangs are very hard to control. So the one bang sounds different from the other bang, for instance. So, and also they are often very narrow band. So they lack low and high frequencies, for instance. The process that we are using is called exponential sine wave sweeping, which is a sweep tone that lasts, in our case, most of the times for about 30 seconds, and it goes up from 10 to 24,000 hertz. And so we record that sweep tone in that church with all its reverb behind it. So we get a sweep with reverb, and then mathematically we put that sweep sort of upright to become a spike again. So all the energy that we released in that church during 30 seconds of sweeping gets compressed into a single sample. So now we are combining the energy that we put into the church of 30 times 44,000 samples into a single one. That's why we can get ridiculous signal-to-noise ratio.
Right.
Something that's never possible with a tiny speaker that we use, because even though we use 12-inch woofers, it is still a ridiculously small piece of equipment compared to the church.
Right.
And but it's like we can blow up this speaker, the power of this speaker in this church, so enormously that we push down the environmental noise so that we can get like 120 dB of signal to noise. Stuff like that is not uncommon in our recordings. This is also why I mentioned that some of the gear, it doesn't really matter. Of course, every bit of noise that we can get rid of is nice. But if you're sweeping for 30 seconds, then, for instance, the noise that your recorder inputs generate is hardly ever an issue. You're going to push that all the way down.
Right.
It's going to be gone.
Right.
From this particular type recording. So we can get away with sometimes using pretty small mobile recorders that are typically used in, for instance, post-production audio, or actually production sound audio. So the recorder that the guy with the boom uses.
Right, right.
We use equipment like that to record this sweep. Normally we use 4 microphones simultaneously. We use omnidirectional microphones because we're interested in the reflections from all the walls and the ceilings, and so reflections come from everywhere, so we want to grab that without trying to filter out what's coming from behind, for instance. So normally we use omnidirectional microphones. As soon as you want to record something with omnidirectional microphones that is in stereo or quad, you need to space them apart. So right off the bat we're stuck to spaced omnidirectional microphone systems, and that's what we've been using right from the start.
I see. How consistent has the microphones and the speakers been over the years?
The 4 microphones that make the corners of the surround system, so when you're using 5 or 5.1 or 4, then you have a left and a right, a left surround and a right surround. Those have been the same microphones right from the start.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we went through a couple of speakers. The ones that we're now using have also been with us for about 8 years.
Oh, okay. Now, one of the things you mentioned was that when you do this sweep, you start at like 5 or sometimes 10 hertz and go up to 24 kilohertz. So conceivably, scientifically, you're going from below the audible spectrum to well above it. Do you do that so that you excite the space properly? Or do you find that gives you more flexibility with the swept tone? Why do you use such a wide range?
Whatever you put into Altiverb when you load up an impulse response that I recorded, I must have put that in the hall first. So if my sweep would run from 1,000 hertz to 5,000 hertz only, then nothing outside that band would come out of Altiverb either. So I would basically be band limiting your input audio. So because I do not know what the frequencies are that you put into it, and with your and Gregory's type of music, you can put basically any frequency in there, right?
Right, indeed.
So you've been in the 5 hertz region, and maybe you've put some Altiverb behind it. You'd be really surprised if the reverb suddenly stopped there.
Good point, right.
Yeah.
Now, how many different places have you done impulse responses on?
I really don't know, but many hundreds.
Right.
And but of course you have to divide them in sort of categories. I mean, to give you an impression, the Gol Goombas of India took me 2 years of negotiating to get into, and on the other hand, I did my own house.
Right.
In which case I had like 8 rooms in 1.5 hours.
Right, there you go. Well,
and that's of course for post. So it's maybe not. I don't really like to count, because if I do, I would like to count the Gol Goombas like triple.
Right, sure, absolutely. For me, I love the beautiful cathedrals and stuff that you've done, because the music I like doing really benefits from those big, beautiful, smooth rooms, right? Mm-hmm. But I have a really good friend who works in post-production, and they're like, oh yeah, we slap Altiverb on everything. And I'm like, really? And I'm thinking like, why do you need cathedrals on everything? And they're like, oh no, we have to do it on everything because we have the interior of a car, and so when everybody's inside of a car, we use Altiverb on everybody to be inside of a car or whatever. Yeah. And it's funny because I never really thought of it in that way, but that probably is a primary use for that software.
It is for in the case of Altiverb, it's definitely a number-wise, it's a large chunk of our audience. Yes,
sure.
People in post, and that's why we go to very strange places as well. So
what's the strangest place, or what are some of the strangest places you've done?
Outdoor spaces are sometimes really strange. I mean, to be able to actually try and record at night in a forest, and not waking up too much wildlife, and not getting in trouble with the authorities there, because I'm making a lot of noise when I go outside, so I have to be away from the people. And right now I'm staring to probably where you are sitting, because you sent me a link to where your place is in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm looking at that and I think, that wouldn't be a problem recording out there. It's probably rather silent, and I'm probably not waking up too many people when I do that at night.
Right, not many ears in the neighborhood. That's true.
Yeah, outdoor is really strange, but I also went inside a fruit juice tank, a 30,000 liter fruit juice tank. We recorded inside the reel of a pipe laying vessel. The reel had a spectacular, very long metallic reverb, so somebody just alerted us to it. That's what happens, if you're around for a number of years like we are, and some people are stunned by the acoustics of, I don't know, maybe the inside of a machine room in a ship or something like that.
Sure.
And they hear something spectacular, then word gets around a little bit around the guy that finds it spectacular, and chances are that it'll reach somebody that knows us, and they'll send us an email. And then they say, we have this pipe laying vessel here, you should come over and listen to this because it's ridiculous. And when it's totally ridiculous, I really want to go there.
You want to do it, right?
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
So have you ever had... Does like James Cameron call you up and say, I really need the inside of an alien space vessel. Can you cook that up for me? Do you ever get any requests like that?
Definitely, but not from Cameron. No,
Or
I
James
guess.
Cameron, or whatever his
But
name
the
is.
guys that work for him, the guys that actually have to dial up that space when he's in the room sitting behind them and says, "I want something spaceship-like." I guess it
Right.
could work like that. Then, those guys make sure that they're prepared, and they do call us up and make samples. But the funny thing is, we also give them the opportunity to do it themselves because the software comes with a method of making your own impulse responses, and that way you can experiment yourself. And I think the bigger studios like to do samples themselves because they, the big shots, the guy that get the awards, like just the other month, Richard King, for instance, got one in December.
Yes.
He goes out and records impulse responses himself in the forests. And that's because he knows what he's looking for exactly.
Well, and he can control the signature then. It becomes a signature of his, right?
It's his. That's nice, of course, but he's willing to share stuff too. But the thing is, he's after a particular sound, and he knows in real life where to get it. So he goes out and records it. And I think that's what he's done with all the elements in his sound design. So why not with his reverb?
Of course.
And I really like that. So there's a multitude. There's of samples out there that we haven't made, and they are just keeping under their heads.
Yeah, right. So of all of the places that you've got to experience, so I think it's one of the things, one detail I wanted to ask about doing the impulse responses. You talk about making a lot of noise. What dB level do you do this sweep at? How loud is it?
Well, I like to do it at a rather uncomfortable level. That's because my speaker will pull that off. And when it's a pure sine tone, it is annoying very quickly. It is just not a nice thing to look to hear one go up from 500 hertz to, say, 3,000 hertz. That's a really painful area.
Uncomfortable, right?
Uncomfortable area, and you know that it's going to get worse when you hit 500 and it goes up. You know it's going to get worse.
Right.
So. I do it at a level where it's uncomfortable because I get best signal-to-noise ratio.
Sure.
Yeah. And outdoors, I do it at a volume that is ridiculous. I use a different type speaker, and it's hurtful. I need to use a speaker that is not a studio monitor outside.
Okay.
And that means that it's not going to be very well equalized. It's a PA-type speaker.
Right.
So in order to measure what I need to do to correct that, because I can correct that after the fact with an inverse filtering trick.
Sure.
I put it in my studio and play it as loud as I intend to do it outside and make a recording of that. And it's an anechoic place, so there is no reverb in that studio. And that is actually nauseatingly loud. But that's mainly because only a fraction of this audio that I'm projecting into space is going to be reflected towards me, back towards me. If I fire it towards some trees, for instance, then only the trunks will give me some audio back. That is only like a 100th% of the whole. Yeah, and that's going to travel 100 meters up and down. So what I'm getting back is very little. Right. And to separate that from the amount of noise that is outdoor, I need to sweep both loud and long. Yeah.
Now, how do you, when you're working outdoors, how do you deal with the environmental issues? So, like, I'm looking out here, and while you're right, it wouldn't bother too many people outside my front door to make the recording. The howling wind and the trains going by, and I'm near Denver, so there's airport traffic all the time. How do you get away from both nature's noise, but the ever-present noise of humans?
Well, the answer is Google Maps. I study Google Maps a lot. It's for the past couple of months, I've been marking spots on the map that are both I can travel to within a day, and while taking my gear, which means I get a drive there. So it's about an 800-kilometer radius around our studios, and I mark spots where very few people live, that is far away from highways and water. Because that makes sound
water,
as well,
course, yeah.
and that have interesting acoustic features. So it must be well, you got to hear something of a reverb there, and I mark those spots, and I also mark places that I can stay in there, like. I go on Airbnb and kind of pre-book little houses there.
Okay, sure.
And then when the wind goes down enough and it's not raining, I hop in my car and I go over.
I see.
But it's like that. But the best thing to do is actually to go out into a place where you live, for instance, drive around, scout to find nice acoustics. I do that with a megaphone. Then know how to drive there in the dark and set up. And then record when the conditions are okay. But it's a lot like hunting and fishing.
It must be enjoyable work to do.
I like it a lot. I like it a lot because I get to go to pretty places. It's working outdoor is a bit exciting. It's just a bit scary when the thing is going, when the sweep is going, and and you know it's going to go on for another 1.5 minutes, like 90 seconds. That's rather long if you basically want to run.
Right.
And you're just hoping you're not waking people up. It used to be worse when we still used the starter pistols, and we would go into the forests at night and shoot our starter pistols. It would be scarier.
Oh, I'll bet.
Because while that might be a rather normal thing in the Rocky Mountains, it's certainly not. So any pistol shot, police will be there within minutes.
Really? Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, up here that hearing a pistol shot just means that you're excited, I think, or something.
Anyway, but indoor too, indoor recordings too, they often require a lot of traveling and arranging, because I do not like to travel with my speaker if I can avoid it. So I try to rent the same type speaker somewhere at the other end. And then, it takes a whole lot of arranging before I'm actually on a stage.
I see. Sure, of course.
And I can start my sweep, and that's always what my travel boils down to. I always give that same totally nihilistic little concert of 30 seconds without any holding my breath a little bit, listening to my sweep and my own heartbeat, because I'm normally a little bit I have run around doing cables and stuff.
Right.
And then when it's on there, I need a bunch more takes, because there's more than one sound to a room. I need more positions and more stuff like that.
Okay.
But then when I'm done, after say half an hour, 3/4 of an hour of sweeping normally, then it's a wrap. I have exactly what I need, and I can relax and have a beer and go home again. That's really nice. And then when I'm in my anechoic chamber again, my studio without acoustics, I can bring back to life this recording. And that is a thrilling moment, because it's not only without acoustics, it's also completely without light if I want it to be.
Right.
So I sit there in the dark, listening to that same room, which is wonderful, because I went there in the first place because it's a nice sounding room, and then to hear that happening around me in my studio again is really fantastic. And then looking forward to bringing it out and getting some feedback on that from our clients, that some of them will hopefully like it too. It's it's really nice.
So one of the things I always like doing with people who develop stuff is ask them about favorites. Of all the things that you've done to this point, all the rooms that you shot or whatever, what is the favorite one that you ran across? What is the one that you look back and like, that was amazing?
Well, I think all of them are. You probably know that when you install Altiverb, you can tick a box, and then it also installs a screensaver. It will basically, if you don't do anything for 15 minutes, then screensaver kicks in, and you just see this slideshow of rooms, and it goes on and on. All the rooms come by. All those rooms have a little story because I'm in there recording it. Sometimes the story makes the room special, but I like it best if the sound makes the room special. So I have, for instance, met spectacular people. I am living with the mother of my second son, and I met her on one of those sampling trips to Concerthaus in Berlin, actually Philharmoniker. That's where I actually, where she worked with me. So that's a spectacular room for me. But in fact, that room might not sound so incredible compared to other rooms. The rooms that just sound absolutely gorgeous, those are the ones that must be my favorite. And one of them I haven't brought out yet. I made it just a month or two ago in New York, which is Kaufman Astoria Studios, which is in Queens actually, not in Manhattan. And that's just it's like an orchestral studio, a little scoring stage. Not even big, so big, but still a rather big live room, a recording studio room. And that sample just blew me away. I play back the same super dry drums that Lance Crane once sent me. Play them in a room like that just to try it out for the first time after I kind of developed the samples at home. And it was just such a massively impressive sounding room. It is so enveloping and so bright all the way down the impulse response. It sounds gorgeous, and I really like the size of that room as well. And very much the same is SARM Studios in London, the Trevor Horn's place that he abandoned.
Oh yeah, right.
That's the room where Do They Know It's Christmas Time was recorded.
Okay.
And the medium rooms, those are the ones that are so universally applicable. It is, and those two really stand out. So SARM and Kaufman Astoria, which we will probably be releasing in 1 or 2 months or so.
Okay, very interesting. Now I want to talk about Speakerphone because where I have a long history interacting with Altiverb, I have never used Speakerphone. And,
all right.
I'm not sure why, other than, if I wanted to change the sense of what I was recording, that I would probably just find a way to do that with a convolution and something like Altiverb. What is the difference? What is it that makes Speakerphone special, and why should I be paying attention to it, and why, instead of not? I should be. Well, I feel like it, because I've loved everything you've ever done. So why haven't I engaged with this? I don't know, but tell me why I should.
Maybe you shouldn't. If you look at the demo movie on YouTube of Speakerphone and you hear something you like, you should probably pick it up, and otherwise maybe you shouldn't. The Speakerphone is a monster. It's physically big on your screen, but what's in it is really huge. There is we've crammed a lot of effects in there, and it's not like they're all there in one screen. It's not like you drag them on from a little library like with what you guys do with Max.
Right.
They're all there, always patched up. So it's like a modular synth wall or something.
Right.
Only of effects. And the thing we did with Speakerphone is we knew that convolution was capable of doing more than reverb.
Right.
And this guy, a friend of ours called Fokke van Zane, had already shown it to us by releasing samples of speakers and telephones and stuff like that. And we went on with that, and through the years we had acquired a massive amount of speakers and phones and buckets and stuff like that. Really tiny things that can also be emulated by convolution. it just didn't make sense to have a reverb time with that and not a distortion.
Right.
So we needed a distortion rather than a reverb time. So there was actually some discussion about putting a distortion into Altiverb, which would have been completely ridiculously silly, looking back. But so we decided to spin that idea off and base it around modeling electroacoustic transducers, so microphones and speakers, and then applying effects to them, nonlinear effects like distortions and compression, but also the crunching, the bit crunching that happens in telephones, aliasing sample rate converters, wow and flutter of vinyl and cassettes, and the effects of radio stations being just tuned next to the station, stuff like, of course, stereo delays for slapbacks on in station halls and stuff like that. Right. It is a whole bunch of effects that you can create presets with that go much further than Altiverb in offering realism. So you can make your sound really sound like it comes through a megaphone, ceiling mounted in a station with the acoustics of that station, and you hear the compression and the distortion, but you can also hear the people walk by and the traffic outside, because all of that stuff is in speakerphone.
Okay, now you open a door for me, and it also explains. So my friend Gregory, he is very into using speakerphone, like constantly. He never explains to me why he uses it, but now I understand, because you can take relatively static sounds, and it sounds like you could really sort of like activate them in many different ways.
Yeah, I haven't come across anything that goes as far in manipulating your input sound so far. It's the making the presets for that thing was so. It was a kind of a daunting task, because you could go so many directions. This thing could live by itself like a synthesizer. There's LFOs in them and a sample playback bay and stuff like that. So you can just do stuff with that. But to simple telephone voices, and the guys in post, it really took off, this product in film post. Because people the level of realism was raised, and they could do it quicker, and people in film post like that because the pressure is always on for them.
Sure.
So they could deliver faster, better, more realistic sounding stuff. But the thing I also really liked is that it was picked up by music producers, because if you listen to hits of the past decade and still, almost all the big hits have some sort of voice mangling in it as well. Mm-hmm. So a little side commentary type lines that sound through a megaphone or a telephone, right, or a whole background vocal going through some sort of a guitar amp sound thing, right, and stuff like that is also done with speakerphone, just to give more character, but not in like a tube warmth type character, but more in, let's make the voice sound like it's really through a telephone, but sure, with even the connection dropping a little bit. Actually, you sound pretty good via Skype here, but there are actually Skype presets in speakerphone to make something sound like it came through Skype, stuff like that.
Yeah, well, sometimes I get those things where it like elongates things and stuff.
Exactly that you can do with speakerphone. We've done the research on the thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Arjen, we're already well past the amount of time that I want to take.
And I didn't get to ask you a single question, Darwin.
That's the whole plan. I'm trying to stay invisible. But I'm always curious to ask what you think the future looks like. You actually, in my mind, you have been part of developing the future. You know, your work with convolution, all that stuff really changed the way people viewed reverb and reverb creation, and also how people viewed being able to work inside the box with a computer. I'm wondering, what do you see as sort of the future of the recording and production arts?
To be honest, I think that from my perspective as a plugin developer, actually the whole audio game hasn't changed that much in the past 10 years. Computers have gotten a little bit faster, and I guess native instruments these days take a lot more chunk out of the pockets of the musicians than they did 15 years ago. But apart from that, if you look at the sequencers that we run in as a plugin, and you know that, actually, well, you're one of the few people that made their way out of it. Again, you first had to make Pluggo, and now you're in Max for Life.
Right.
So you've kind of broken the barriers a little bit. You made your space a little wider there, which I'm envious about. But other than that, if you look at what these production tools are like, they're still based on the same paradigm as 20 years ago. It hasn't changed that much. And I'm doing convolution-based stuff so far in the past decade, a decade and a half actually, and I am recording spaces that have been around for sometimes hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, and they haven't changed. And I recorded them in a format that has been current from when I started studying, like in 1987, to now. Nothing has changed. There's like it went from 16 to 24-bit maybe. That's it. So I'm actually thinking I can write this a little longer, and I don't see it changing very much. I have seen some musical styles come back and go away again. I think there are. I don't think there are massive changes coming. And I've been hearing about the collapse of the music industry for the past, 7-8 years?
Right.
And of course, major things have changed there. But I'm not sure if you see this, Darwin. The type customer that we talk to is still the same type customer that we talked to 10 years ago. They're creative people trying to make something pretty. Most of them get paid for it. So from my perspective, not very much is changing. And I really like it because I have a job to do. I've been to many places, but there's like a million more that I need to go to. So let's not change it too much because, I'd like to finish the job.
I hear you. Well, Arjen, that's inspiring and also pointed. I agree. Not a lot has changed, but it is awesome that we continue to work with and for creative people doing creative things. Well, Arjen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I feel like you've done so much for helping the industry move forward, and I really appreciate you being willing to talk about how you do the things you do and what's going on behind the curtain. It's really fabulous. Is there any last advice for people that you would have for people who are interested in pursuing technology and music technology and that kind of stuff? What would you suggest to people that want to get into it now?
You mean want to become a producer of tools like I am?
Right, exactly. If there's, I have a son who soon will be graduating from school, and he'd like to get into this stuff. What is the advice that you would give to someone like that?
I think he should just cram out algorithms and little tools, whether people need them or not. They shouldn't necessarily be special. Maybe just have a bit of character, or as long as he made them and finished them in a way that he can release them. So I think the key is you pick an idea, basically any idea, and then you finish it. And in the process of finishing it, you will find a few little quirks that you can put into it, be it graphical or just in the GUI or in the sound, hopefully. And then when you have a finished product, you're going to release it, maybe for free, maybe for a little bit of money, and then people will pick it up and they will give you feedback on it, and you will be a happy guy. And that's my advice. And then you're hopefully gonna fail scoring a hit maybe 5 or 10 or 15 times, and then the 16th time, when you least expect it, maybe you'll score a hit.
Right. That's actually, the idea of do the work, get out there and do work, and let people interact with your work. That's really
and
great advice.
Don't sit around waiting for the next incredible idea, because really mediocre ideas are enough. I mean, I don't want to put any company down, but look around you who made it.
Right.
In our line of work.
Right.
Not very many of those ideas were spectacular to begin with.
Right.
And but they finished it, and people are happy with it, and it sounds rather nice. And so will the stuff that your son makes, if he just does it.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much again. I really appreciate your time. It's great catching up with you, and great hearing about your work.
Sure. Okay, Darwin. Next time we speak about your work, because I have a ton of questions for you too. All right?
Okay, thanks a lot.
It's been a joy, Darwin. Bye-bye.
Bye. And there you have it, another great podcast. When I listen to Arjen's story about what he does for a living, I am very envious. It seems pretty awesome to hop in a car and go shoot an impulse response of a forest. That sounds like a lot of fun. But anyway, I want to thank you very much for listening. Thanks for sharing with your friends. Great listenership again in recent weeks. And I look forward to doing this for a long, long time. So thank you very much. Have a great one, and I'll catch you next week.